In this video, we're going to take some time to look at the core tags for URLs and error handling. So we can take a look at a couple different ways that we can use these tags right in our pages and interact with them, sending parameters to other pages or just redirecting to other pages or handling errors on our pages. So with that, what we want to get is the JSTL_URL tags and error handling.war file. And this will be in the resources, and we can use that to look at the code that we're going through today. So go ahead and get that loaded into our system. And then once that's up and running, what we'll see is that there are a couple new pages, one for error handling in tags and one for error handling in tags 2, which is just going to give us a couple different options. We've modified the navbar.jsp file to include some of the CURL tags that we're going to start with. And then we have a URL with parameters page as well to show how we can pass parameters and work with those parameters. So here we have our basic URL tag. What we're going to do is essentially create a variable that will set with this URL tag to contain the value for the URL that we want to pass to. So here we have the index URL, and that of course is pointing to index.jsp, login to login.jsp. I have a couple different for error handling, city view, country view, sign out with the controller, invalidating sessions and removing cookies, and sign out with the view. So all of those are set into variables, and each one is of course tagged as a variable with its respective value. And then when we want to use them, we can simply place them in our anchor tag using an expression for those different values and wrap them in the text. Additionally, what we can do is actually just print those out if we wanted to. So what we'll see down here is that we can actually print out the value to show the full URL if we wanted to, rather than showing home or login. Of course, these are more user-friendly. The other one to look at then is the CURL value for URL parameters with JSP, which is a variable set to URL with params. And we're just going to pass in a couple parameters here just so we can see this in action. One for param UID, one for param password, and they have some defined parameter values to go along with that, and then they'll be rendered on the page. So if we look at the URL with parameters page, it's nothing more than just showing out those parameters coming in through the parameter on the page itself. And of course, we are very familiar with the other pages that we'll hit with our different links. So let's go ahead and run this real quick, and we'll see some of these params in play. So obviously, any one of these that we click on is using the CURL tag that we were looking at. So we need to log in. Let's expand this so we have more room. And of course, the password really doesn't matter. Let's go ahead and remember ourselves here in case we accidentally sign out. Now we have all of our information in place. And of course, we have down here our URL with params. And that, of course, is the URL that we're actually generating. You can see there, all the information is printed out right there. Passwords, user ID that we're passing along there. And once we click that, it does take us to the page we expected with the parameters, and they are listed as expected. So that's URL tags. Let's take a look now at the error handling. So we already have our error handler in place, which is our main error handler for the whole page. And I've added a param.ex down here as well. So in case something passes a parameter with an exception on it, instead of just the page context exception, we can actually render that data here as well. And so again, if it's null, since it's an expression, it just won't print anything. So that's very nice. Let's look at error handling in tags. So basically, when we're going to be working with the error handling here, what we're going to do is we're going to set our bad code that we expect to maybe have an error inside of a C:catch or a catch tag. And here what we get then is the variable myBadCodeBlock will be set if the exception actually happens. So what I did was first did a result with an expression just to show that even if there's an error in an expression, of course, expressions are very nice and they tend to work regardless of the fact that there's an error. So we'll see that that actually happens. So I did have to use a script here in order to generate the error. I tried to print it out. If it would have been valid, it should print there. After we've written the catch block, you'll note that it will actually run until the point where we hit the error, and then it'll quit. And then the next step will be to test if that bad code block is not null. Now, that's our variable name. So whatever our variable name is for our exception block, if it's not equal to null, then we have an error. So here we're going to print out the message and the actual exception in full detail with a breaking line between them. So nothing major, just so we can see that we'll get a divide by 0, and we can handle that directly on the page. Now you'll note that because we put this in the catch, it won't forward on to our error handling page for our system, which is really nice. So we could actually trap an error and prevent us from going to that error page if we expect there might be some issue on this specific page. So if we go ahead and go back here and we click on our error tags, we'll get that the first one was the result was infinity. Well, it's actually 32 divided by 0 is an error, but in expression language, it just prints out infinity. Well, here we have our error divide by 0, error arithmetic exception divide by 0. So you can see that one error was trapped and both of the different displays were rendered. The default display with the message so that it's a user-friendly version and the full exception. Of course, error tags 2 is simply going to pass that information on, so it's the same exact code, but when we get an error, we're actually going to use a redirect, and in that redirect, we're going to set a parameter for that exception, and we'll pass along just the message. So when we get directed back to our error handler page now, which we do have to direct to specifically since we're no longer in error once we've caught the error here, the page is no longer in error, so this will actually have to be forwarded or redirected directly to that error page, and we'll pass in the message. We'll see that in action here just by clicking on error tags 2. And you can see we are taken to our default handler. You can see that it is a parameter passed in, and it's divide by 0.